I went to the Northumbria police and I said, we've got this picture, we're running it on our front page the next day. And then they came back and said, you can't run that. Why not? He's like, because that'll tip him off where we are. We know he's reading newspapers, and he was.
The crime agents.
Do you remember the Raoul Moat one? In the northeast of England.
Manhunt.
Yeah,
No,
oh my god.
It was a pretty emotional
massive.
one, yeah.
Just to remind people, it was like in 2010, and this guy called Raoul Moat had just been released from prison. He then travelled to Gateshead because his ex-girlfriend had just got a new boyfriend. He shot his ex-girlfriend. He shot her new boyfriend, killed him. She was severely injured. He then went on the run, and at that time it was, a big-scale manhunt. But this was just taking in all the officers from the northeast, trying to track this guy down, including a firearms team from Yorkshire.
Your part of the world, you must know.
Yeah, it was.
Very,
I remember covering that. That was my kind of first absolutely massive story I worked on. And then I remember the police doing a press conference saying, we believe we know who this is. Here's a picture. So they gave us a picture of Raoul Moat at the time, but they couldn't find him and then about 48 hours later, we heard reports that a police officer had been shot who was who was waiting on a roundabout in his car.
Yeah.
Raoul Moat got him to wind the window down, and then he put a shotgun through and shot PC David Rathband in the face. And it was at that moment that the manhunt just went from serious to the most serious type of manhunt. He then disappeared. And then it was 24 hours after that we were given a piece of CCTV of him walking into B&Q. And what he was doing, he was getting camping materials. So that gave them a clue as to where he was heading. The officers, the investigators, they found that he had links to a place called Rothbury, which was about an hour's drive north of Newcastle, maybe a little less. And then they found his car there. And the whole world seemed to descend on this. The whole press pack. I mean, I remember all the press just taking over all the Airbnbs, all over all the hotels. We were everywhere, obviously flooded with police. I've spoken to firearms officers in London who were called up after the shooting of PC David Rathband. So the firearms officers in London were sent up. Firearms officers in Manchester sent up. Firearms officers in everywhere in the country descended on this tiny little picturesque town called Rothbury.
I mean, he'd already murdered one person, severely injured another, but
yeah,
also shot and severely injured David Rathband, who
blinded him in the end,
and who I think David eventually took his own life as a result of all of this. So, the point is, it wasn't intensified because he'd shot a police officer in some respects, because he was still an armed, dangerous criminal who murdered someone. But if you're willing to do that to a police officer in uniform, the public stand no chance. Yeah. And that's why he immediately becomes a whole new sort of category of serious killer.
It was. I just remember that being the most weird week because all the journalists were trying to get the story, and I remember one time when I got slipped a photograph of his campsite. So what he was doing, he was just camping, and then moving on to somewhere else.
Just describe that area. How big's that area? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a massive woodland. I mean, miles and miles of woodland. So it was an absolute nightmare.
So if you know what you're doing, you could.
And he did. Exactly. He had lots of experience, and in the end, they got like that expert Ray Mears up to try and trace him. And actually, the officer, we all thought it was a gimmick.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah. We all thought it was an absolute gimmick, but I've spoken to the officers who said he was actually a massive help in that investigation.
Helps train our specialist search teams.
Yeah, I know.
Because they do that kind of geographical plotting but somebody had to train them. Yeah, it's probably Ray.
And and it was at that time, and it just shows you how the police and the journalists kind of work together, or not in this case, because we kept getting stories that the police didn't have at the time. So, for example, we got the picture of the campsite before the police. So I remember I was working newspapers at the time, and then I went to Northumbria Police, and I said, we've got this picture, we're running it on our front page the next day. And then they came back, you can't run that. Why not? He's like, because that'll tip him off where we are. We know he's reading newspapers. And he was. At every single campsite, everywhere he was reading newspapers about himself, and then moving on. It was extraordinary time. And then it was about day 5, we got a tip-off that Raoul Moat had been seen just walking down the centre of Rothbury village, just in the middle of the day.
In plain sight.
And at that time, he was the most recognised man in the UK. He would walk down, and then there was 2 police officers who actually saw him. But they weren't firearms officers, so they didn't approach him. They called it in, but at the time they called it in, he'd gone. And then there was also, we got another story that some...
And of course they did the right thing. People think there's a fine line between heroism and stupidity.
I mean, everyone thought he's carrying a shotgun, basically, so you're not going to approach him unless you've got a gun yourself. And then there was one story we got where he broke into some family's home and started opening tins of beans, and then he made himself like beans on toast, and then he went into the spare room, and then he slept in the spare room, and then he got up and then went on the next day. And it was only when the family woke up they saw all this evidence and called it in. So this was a kind of game of cat and mouse where the police were desperately.
I mean, he's increasingly chaotic, isn't it? I mean, do you think he was actually looking to be caught?
At the end, he was. He just had enough. He was starving, and I think he just had enough. He realised that there was no way out. I mean, the thing is, he had lots of skills to be able to kind of carry on and survive in that environment, but at the end, I think it must have been. I mean, one officer told me it was just by the time he gave himself up, he was so depleted and starving and thirsty that he had enough, and he came out. And then, of course, he was cornered on a riverbank, and surrounded by police officers, and there was a standoff for hours. And I remember we couldn't get anywhere near the site for obvious reasons. And then we actually, all the journalists went into a pub and just started watching Sky News, because they managed to get a camera fairly near, and you could kind of hear the toing and froing between Raoul Moat and the officers. It was like the best drama you've ever seen. It was unbelievable.
It's interesting because Sky have big budgets, because it's the number of times we have got information because Sky have managed to deploy either a helicopter.
Well, you go in police incident rooms, they've got Sky News on.
Yeah, running.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason they've got Sky News on. So and then it ended with one of the officers controversially shot him with a taser gun. A kind of a new taser gun, and that ended up with Raoul Moat shooting himself, and then he died.
I know, and there was a big inquiry. I mean, that's clearly what we would now call a death following contact by police. Used to be called deaths in custody, but that's an example of where the person isn't yet arrested and dies at police hands. But the controversy was, of course, that was not just a brand new taser gun. It hadn't actually been licensed for use yet in the UK.
Been licensed.
So the idea was that you've shot him with something that would have triggered him to kill himself. I'm not sure public sympathy was on his side, given what he had done as a person.
No, not at all. I mean, what do you think? Do you think police learn lessons from these major manhunts that are played out in the public eye? Because it was, listen, let's face it, that one with Raoul Moat, it was embarrassing. He was on the run for 7 days with pretty much what it seemed like every single police officer and journalist trying to hunt him down. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about your amazing story about Ray Mears coming up and teaching us how to search wooded areas, and I believe one of your great footballing legendary heroes came up, Gazza, to do a little bit of negotiation on the plot.
Gazza.
Those kind of, which is obviously fantastic media, but is humiliating and looks foolish for policing. So what do they learn about? Don't forget, this was in a day. This was in the days before 24/7, 365 media, and before. Imagine what that would be like now, and imagine being the senior investigating officer or the chief constable of that location. Watching that being played out minute by minute. What do you learn from things like that? Well, have a better relationship with the media, be very good at the media yourself, and we're seeing a lot of that in the last 12 months. You know, I mean, if you go from Southport to the Premier League winners celebration and the difference in communications between what Merseyside police said around Southport and what they then said about, to try and stop that vacuum being filled by speculation. And
they after the the Liverpool parade, they came out very quickly and gave as much information as possible.
Because don't forget, in a situation like this, particularly when it's long running and it's going, the people who are really going to help, provided they're on your side and not speculating and keeping. I'm going to ask you in a minute, put you on the spot slightly, but you want the media to help you find this person. This is danger. This is not just public interest good news story. This is danger to the public. So you want them on your side. And what does it feel like when you've got the scoop, when you've got the piece of information that no other newspaper, TV station, radio station or social media outlet has got, and you've got the opportunity to put that out, and the police say to you, you can't?
Well, the answer to your first part of the question is that this is exactly why you start being a journalist. You want to get the scoop. You want to get the bit of information that no one else has, and there is no better feeling. I remember when the police told us that time, they said you can't do it. I wasn't having any of it. I think it was eventually it went up to my editors, who had to negotiate with the communications team at Northumbria Police. But I was like, no, absolutely no chance. That's
That's
the job of the journalist, right? That's the job of the reporter, to push it as far as you can go, and it's up to the editors effectively if they run it or not. What eventually happened in the end there was we came up with a deal that we wouldn't put it out in the next day's paper, and we would put it out the following day, and they would give us more photographs that we could use if we held back. The problem is, by the time the next day's paper came out, other papers had it. So
there's definitely an entire episode about how journalists and police officers work at crime scenes.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I mean that was I remember that one especially because I remember the detective chief superintendent. He brought us all in and just said, "Will you stop doing these stories?" It's like telling journalists not to do stories. It's like telling cops not to catch criminals. So anyway,
if you believe we still do.